If you've ever gone beyond a world border, you'll probably recognize this empty, open void. It appears at the end of almost every game, and essentially is the place from where the world was originally built up from. You can stay here as long as you want, but overstay your welcome and you might begin to see terrifying things appear out of nowhere. Stare at them long enough and something even stranger happens. The terrifying feeling entirely vanishes. What exactly are we looking at here? What is this feeling? You might just be able to find the answer by asking a pilot. Back in 1957, researcher Brant Clark and Captain Ashton Grabio received reports of pilots suddenly beginning to hallucinate. According to their findings, several pilots felt as if they were floating outside of their aircraft, describing the sensation as though they had somehow entered another world. To find a possible cause, Brant and Ashton asked the pilots what they were doing just before this phenomenon occurred, and they found three rather interesting overlapping conditions. First, about 90% of the pilots were alone at the time of their experience. Secondly, most pilots were flying at high altitudes. And third, about half of them mentioned receiving little to no orders just before this moment. The reason Brant and Ashton saw those conditions as overlapping was because they each left the pilots' minds in a state of wandering. This they believed to be the cause of the break-off phenomenon. And it's something you can experience in a sensory deprivation tank. These tanks are completely lightless, soundproof pods filled with a shallow layer of water that is heated to your skin temperature. Together, these features remove most, if not all, stimuli from your surroundings, ensuring that when you float inside, you lose all physical sensation from your body. Because the brain isn't built to handle no information at all, it eventually makes up for that by producing static noise in the form of random shapes and colors. You might have already experienced this in places such as Subnautica's void. It kind of mimics this same sense of sensory deprivation, because in the background you also hear a repeating ambient noise. The longer you stay in these spaces, the more shapes and colors start to appear. And eventually, your brain takes those patterns and organizes them into what we see as hallucinations. This results in something known as the Ganzfeld effect. And Brant and Ashton believed that this was one of the primary causes for their break-off phenomenon. However, this wasn't the only thing that they were interested in. Their main focus was to actually identify what each pilot felt during this phenomenon. And so they asked them. But according to their findings, not every pilot felt the same under these conditions. Only about 38% of them felt something closer to fear, while the majority actually described the experience as a sort of peaceful exhilaration. The two thought this might have to do with the different traits of the pilots, but upon further questioning, they saw no significant difference in age, jet hours, or overall flight experience that could help explain why the pilots felt two entirely different emotions. So what was actually going on here? Well, let's go back to a time where this exact phenomenon was just under discussion. About 400 years ago, the astronomer Johannes Kepler was reading a newly proposed theory about the world. It was written by the philosopher Giordano Bruno and claimed that there isn't actually a center to our universe, which at the time was most commonly believed to be the sun. Upon reading this, Kepler tried to imagine a world existing under Bruno's claim, but something about it left him deeply terrified. To put his thoughts into perspective, let's look at the night sky. We're able to see occasional stars throughout because their light is able to reach our eyes. But what about the gaps in between those stars? Well, back in Kepler's time, how light travels wasn't yet fully understood, meaning many simply saw those spaces as some sort of wall marking the end of the universe. Bruno's theory contradicted this common belief. It considered the possibility that those spaces actually stretch out infinitely. it detached Kepler from the structured reality he knew. His understanding of the world relied on the idea that humanity sat comfortably near the center of a perfect, mathematically accurate universe. So when he read Bruno's theory, he understood it as though Bruno implied the empty gaps between the stars of the night sky somehow represented infinity itself. It made Kepler's view on humanity suddenly feel entirely insignificant, simply because it contradicted all of his previous understandings. And beyond a game's world border, our previous understanding of the world also seems to disappear. We don't necessarily feel insignificant in these spaces, yet our minds are naturally programmed to do so, resulting in most of us feeling a strange combination of fear and something else. Essentially, we look through this infinite void through the lenses of both Bruno and Kepler, meaning to figure out exactly what we're feeling, we just need to know what Bruno saw in infinity instead. This might come out of nowhere, but have you ever stood at the base of a giant waterfall? If not, that's okay too, but let's imagine that's where we currently are. Compared to everything around you, this waterfall is clearly the largest landmark, and it's pretty easy to end up just staring at it for no apparent reason. From where we're standing, we aren't in any danger, so getting lost in that moment didn't feel terrifying. Instead, it felt rather peaceful, didn't it? Eventually, you snap back to your senses like nothing happened, but during that moment, you were focusing solely on the waterfall and not even your thoughts intervened. This is a concept known as the sublime, and it was coined by the philosopher Immanuel Kant back in the 18th century. Kant described the sublime as a feeling which sits in between fear and awe. He believed that when we look at a massive landmark such as a waterfall, we first fear it until we're able to determine our own safety. Then, only after we've done that, are we able to view this landmark for what it is, and possibly find peace of mind from it. Though, what happens when we aren't able to determine our own safety? Well, for that, let's return to the void found at the end of a world border. Since this place is unknown to us, we don't necessarily want to stay here forever. But when we stare into that wide abyss, we see something that looks a lot like infinity. Something that is large enough to catch our attention and make us feel in awe at the sight of it. As a result, our minds can easily begin to drift off and cause strangely terrifying hallucinations to start appearing out of nowhere. Yet, the longer we stay in that space, the more we begin to find familiarity in it. And eventually, those things are no longer all that terrifying.